Ian Bremmer, the president of Eurasia Group, pioneered this very famous idea of a G0 world, essentially the idea that we're currently in a moment of geopolitical recession, and that's been triggered by the United States taking a step back in world affairs. And quite notably, you disagree with that narrative. You have a different take on the world. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I do. I know Ian Bremmer well. His work is something which, in my studies, I grew up studying his works. But his assumption, I think, is very US-centric. His basic theory is that the reason why the world is so geopolitically active is because somehow America is taking a back seat in world affairs, which is allowing pockets of vacuums of power to emerge. And this is causing powers which wouldn't have been active in specific parts of the world now being more active because the US is no longer active in that part of the world. But that is a very false assumption. First, because it gives too much importance to the power and the influence of the United States in all corners of the world. And second, it doesn't take into account the concept that we developed, which is a nation's centers of powers are developing. Now, this is what's breakthrough about the work that we do, is that although the US is important, it's important not because it's magically more powerful than anyone else. It's important because it has developed on all 6 axes of what we call the centers of power. So there are certain things which nations develop, and these aren't only specific to nations, but principalities of the past, empires of the past, which are all based on these 6 axioms of power, which allow it to be a very powerful player in world affairs, which include things like its military balance, its active consumer market, its technological leadership, its geostrategic positioning, where it's located on the map and how it takes advantage of choke points, and its size and its access to the sea and how many seas and oceans it has access to, etc. How many enemies and friends it has around it. So these are many things that are constantly evolving organically. And the US, since after the fall of the USSR, was the undisputed military power of the world. And it developed its COPs faster than anyone else and had that time frame to develop. Before the US, it was the European empires which also had very powerful COPs, which is why we saw the empires of Britain, of France, of Spain, of Portugal, etc. being so powerful on the world stage because they developed these COPs. But after World War II, the majority, if not all, European powers were completely, cut from their throne because of the sheer damage that happened after the 2 world wars. That the US was the only nation which had the time from the end of the Cold War until now to develop on all these six sides, which is why it's so powerful. But as time passes, other nations around the world will have the time to also develop their centers of power, which will then allow them to have a much larger voice in world affairs, which will then allow them to, throw their weight around, I guess, a little bit more, because they have more of an income coming into their country, because they're spending more money on defense, because their GDP is rising, because their actual middle class is growing, which means, companies want to sell into that market a lot more, which is why they then have the ability to use tariffs on other nations, which is making the World Trade Organization much more of a hotbed of dispute. So this is why nations are growing, and this is why geopolitics is becoming more of an issue.